Okay, I'm going to tell somebody else's story tonight. One of the things that I do, apart from tell stories in Soul Point, is I write books. So I've got this. This is a book I'm writing at the moment, and this is about people who go through hard times in life and how their lives change when they meet with God. So this is a guy who's talking about him when he was young, and his name is Steve. And I'm going to kind of start in a weird section of his life. I'm going to start when he's in primary school, okay? So this is Steve. Steve started daydreaming what it would be like to have a dad like all the other kids. And he used to watch everybody come out from school, and he used to watch them in the playground, and they used to see mum and dad, but he'd only see his mum. And sometimes he wouldn't see his mum because mum would be working. So poor Steve used to build himself this imaginary world. And he had this amazing imagination where he survived in. And he used to pretend he had the best dad ever. So all the TV programs that were on at the time, he mixed them all together, put them in a big cocktail shaker, shook them together, and came out with the most perfect dad. But when he was describing his father to the other kids, they started making fun of him. They started to make fun of the stuff that he was saying, because obviously they knew it wasn't true. And things started to get a little bit out of hand when he started talking about his dad being the Incredible Hulk. Yeah, because it's a little bit unbelievable, isn't it? But things got even worse for Steve, because the more that he was picked on, the more his imagination grew. And his imaginary world grew beyond the real world. So at one point, Steve actually believed he was a creature like the Hulk. So when boys used to come and beat him up, he used to pretend to transform into a creature and go wild. And that was really sad. And his family started getting very, very worried. Because if that happened today, you'd see a counsellor, you get help, and that was it. When Steve was a little boy, they would come to his house, they'd take him away, and they'd put him in a big house, and they'd keep him there until they could cure him. And his family were very afraid of that, because he came from a family who was like a single-parent family, and that wasn't normal either. So they were always watching him. And poor old Steve, he found himself kind of in this really weird world, and his family thought the best thing they could do was to try to get him to go somewhere where he could mix with other kids apart from school. So he went to Sunday school. And when he was in Sunday school, he was hearing these amazing, fantastic stories about heroes in the Bible. So he heard about King David. Have you heard the story of King David? He comes and he beats a giant that's 9 foot tall. And then he hears a story about Samson, who's a man who actually defeats an army with a jawbone of a donkey. And he was hearing all these stories, and he was telling his parents about these stories, and his parents thought it was great because he was learning stuff from the Bible. And he was really learning about these superheroes that God made so that he could look after his own special people. But the other thing that Steve found was that he couldn't read. Steve was in a kind of cycle where he tried to read, but he couldn't. So he learned to read himself. He was given a Bible, and he learned to read every night. He'd read a little bit at a time, and he taught himself to read. But poor old Steve, he once went to a Bible study for young people. Now, Steve's a bit clumsy, okay? And he doesn't do things like everybody else. So everyone was out of the house, and Steve goes to pick his own clothes. Now, I think we can all get ourselves dressed. You all look like you dressed yourselves tonight, fine. Steve couldn't, okay? He was colourblind. So the first thing he did was he got a bright red pair of trousers, a purple shirt, which he found at the bottom of the basket, which was still a bit smelly. And then he found another blue coat which he stuck on, and a pair of Wellingtons with 2 different colours. Now, his top that he had on wasn't his. It was his uncle's. Now, Steve, he couldn't read. That's all he knew was there was words across it, And there was a picture on there of a guy with long hair smoking a funny cigarette. Yeah. And he was going to a Bible study. So Steve is on his way now to the Bible study, and where he was living, there was like old industry everywhere. So there was this big old, how can I describe it, like old warehouse. And when he was going past it, he thought, well, I'm early, so I'm going to have an adventure. So he squeezed his way in through the corrugated steel. And as he was looking across, he could see this rope hanging down. And he thought, that looks like fun. So he goes over, he gives it a tug, and all this dust falls from the top onto his face. So he's there now, he's wiping his eyes are watering, dusts himself off, has a little swing, but as he's in it, his imagination starts playing games with him, because it's starting to get dark, it's starting to set, and the wind's starting to make noises with the corrugated steel that's in the building. So he feels like there's this dark snake creeping through the building towards him. And I don't know if you've ever felt like this when you've been in a dark building and you're like, oh my gosh, there's something behind me. And he could feel this thing coming behind him. And he was trying to walk as slowly and as calmly as he possibly could without panicking. So he didn't feel stupid. And he was just getting out through the corrugated steel, and he could feel this dark thing coming up behind his legs. And he ran out. And as he ran out, he heard rip. And he'd rip his trousers from the top there right round to his knees. So now he was going to the minister's house, covered in dirt, wearing a funky T-shirt. His jeans were ripped right round. You could see his underpants, bless him, his paisley underpants. And he was going to the minister's house. He goes inside. He sits opposite a crowd of young girls, all looking at him. Then one of the girls points at his T-shirt, and he looks down and he realises what's written on it. And it's not very nice. It's a swear word. And it's not one of the polite ones. So he quickly zips it up. It's the middle of summer. He's sweating. The sweat is dripping off him. And he's so dirty that he can see streaks of dirt landing on his jeans. And to make it hotter, the minister said, now we're going to read the Bible. Does anybody here want to read for me? Steve picks up the only thing that he'd been learning to read, never read out loud in his life, was his Bible. And he opened it and he said, we're reading John 3. It took him ages. He couldn't find it. The minister found it for him. And he went to John 3, verse 16. There was a Pharisee. And as he was going, everybody was starting to snigger. Everyone was starting to giggle. And he got halfway through and he was so embarrassed. He ran out into the bathroom, locked the door, and he pressed his head up against the cold tiles, and he just sobbed. God, why can't I be like everybody else? Why can't I be able to read? Why can't I be like everyone else out there? Why can't I be like the cool guy that's all dressed posh? Why can't I be like them? And he came in, and the room was quiet because the minister had obviously told him off. The thing is, when you cry with a dirty, stained face, you can't hide the tear marks. You know that? Girls, you know, if you've got makeup on and you cry, your best mates are going to know you're crying. It's not the same with most of us guys, is it? We can kind of hide it. Well, I'm all right, I'm okay. But really, sometimes our heart breaks because we sometimes devalue ourselves, or we don't see the value that we have. And poor Steve couldn't see the value that he had because he said he couldn't read, because he said he was dirty, because he said he came from a single family, because of this and because of that. But the verse that he was trying to read goes on, and it says this. It says in John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And whoever believes in him might not perish but have everlasting life. That talks about value. We've got a relative who is has been a really successful businessman. And he told me some time ago when we were buying something, we were buying a car, and he said, look, Pete, things are only as valuable as much as somebody is willing to pay for it. Now, you might not see yourself valuable, but God was willing to give his own son for you. Now, what that means is this, and I'm going to say this really quickly, because it's an easy way to understand how much value God has in you. There's a story of a guy that was riding a bus. And as he was riding the bus down this mountain, the brakes went. And he was doing all he could to press the brakes. And everybody in the bus could see what was going to happen. On the left-hand side, there was like an escape route into a field. But in the escape route was a child. He had the bus driver to choose either to take everybody off the cliff or to go into the field, which meant running the child over. When they all got out safe and sound in the field, one of the women said, I feel for the bus driver that he had to make that decision. And the policeman said, you'll never know. He said, that child, she said, was his only son. That's what God has done for us. That's the value God has put on you. So if you ever see yourself devalued, if you ever see yourself as not valuable, this is how much God values you. You want to put a price on yourself? If you ever want to look for a price on your backside, you know, when you turn something over in the shop, if you ever want to do that, that's God's price on you, is his only son. That's why we want to tell you this every week. This is how much God loves you. This is how much God values you. And I want to leave you with that tonight, that you don't go leaving here tonight thinking that you're undervalued. God values you that much and he loves you that much. And that's what being a Christian is all about, is accepting God's love and saying, you really love me that much? Then I'll follow you.